Good afternoon, everybody. If you have questions you want to ask, please write them down now and wait till the end of the class for when we do a Q&A, and you'll be able to think about them and ask them in a concise manner by the end of the class. I think Geshe said sometimes it's clear in your mind, but it sort of doesn't come out of your mouth coherently. So yeah, let's try to avoid that. Geshe just quoted a verse from Tsongkhapa's three principal aspects of the path. I can't find it right now. Perhaps it's this one. Maybe it's verse number 9, sorry. If you lack the wisdom that realizes the nature of things, although you might grow accustomed to renunciation and bodhicitta, you will be unable to cut through conditioned existence at its root. Exert yourself, therefore, in the methods for realizing interdependence. Essentially, he quoted a verse relating to realizing the nature of reality. It's not enough to generate bodhicitta and practice the perfections without having a realization of emptiness. And this ties into our topic of special insight. So until now, we've discussed the topic of calm abiding, and we've talked a little bit about special insight. We've discussed that one needs to rely on the collection of causes to accomplish both. And we spoke about how calm abiding is principally a mind that remains single-pointedly focused on its singular object. And through slowly training and developing this factor of abidance and factor of clarity to its fullest extent, one achieves calm abiding. However, according to Buddhism, it's not enough to simply achieve calm abiding to accomplish our ultimate goals. We still need to go on to cultivate special insight. If you generate calm abiding, is that enough to act as an antidote to destroy the afflictions? It's not. It cannot uproot them together with their seeds. What it can do is temporarily block manifest attachment, for example, to sounds, smells, tastes, forms, right? The five objects of desire. However, it cannot stop this fundamental ignorance that is constantly causing all of our suffering and upsets. And that's because the apprehension of I is still there, whether you have calm abiding. So calm abiding alone is not going to enable us to achieve liberation. We need to unite calm abiding with special insight. And that's why Tsongkhapa says, if you lack the wisdom that realizes the nature of things, although you might grow accustomed to other qualities, you cannot exit samsara, essentially. That's not to say that it's not fundamentally important for us to cultivate calm abiding. Of course it is. The point is that calm abiding alone is not sufficient. For example, there are many examples of non-Buddhist Indian practitioners who achieved calm abiding and were able to be reborn in the higher realms, right? In the four concentrations and the formless realms. However, what happens is that eventually one falls back down to the lower realms, even into hell again. And that's because their calm abiding wasn't qualified by bodhicitta and a realization of emptiness, right? That's why they fall back down. Also important to note is that all of us have accomplished calm abiding before. And that is because we have been reborn as gods before, right? Throughout our countless rebirths, it's guaranteed that at some point we were reborn in the higher realms. And one cannot be reborn as a god in the higher realms without achieving calm abiding, right? We clarified this in previous sessions. But we don't remember these rebirths. And because our calm abiding at that point was not qualified by bodhicitta and a realization of emptiness, it wasn't sufficient to stop us from falling back down again. So therefore, it is important to cultivate special insight and unify it with this calm abiding. Tsongkhapa says, although you might grow accustomed to renunciation and bodhicitta, you will be unable to cut the root of cyclic existence. Bodhicitta and renunciation are fundamental, right? Without bodhicitta, it's difficult to have long-lasting happiness, right? The happiness we have is unstable. We can be happy in the morning, and then by evening, our happiness turns back into suffering. And that is because we cherish ourselves above all else. It's this this unhappiness that we generally experience is linked back to us prioritizing ourselves above others, right? If someone were to ask you, do you want this or do you want to give it away to somebody else? 9 times out of 10, you're going to say, I want to stuff the others, right? It's rare that someone would put others above themselves. And this is because we lack altruism or bodhicitta, right? Wherein we prioritize the other. But bodhicitta alone is not enough to cut the root of cyclic existence, right? Tsongkhapa says, although you might grow accustomed to it, you will not be able to cut the root of cyclic existence. So if you wish to cut the roots of existence, Tsongkhapa says, therefore exert yourself in the methods for realizing interdependence. And the method for realizing interdependence is special insight. It's difficult to imagine how somebody could naturally reason themselves into a realization of interdependence, at least the kind that we are seeking, right? Just from going day to day in your life and suddenly it all becoming clear. Instead, we need to exert ourselves in study and contemplation to arrive at this correct understanding of interdependence, right? I don't see how you could do so by doing business, for example, day to day. So the methods for realizing emptiness or interdependence require that we use this precious opportunity we have now to engage in study and contemplation. This human body that we have attained is incredibly precious. For whatever practice or study or contemplation you wish to engage in, this is the foundation of it all. And it is in dependence upon the accumulation of merit and the purification of obscurations in your previous lifetimes that it came about. So you really have to consider the preciousness and be grateful towards your previous existences, isn't it? Right? And this all revolves around this concept of past lifetimes, according to Buddhism, right? So whether you want to develop renunciation, bodhicitta, realize emptiness, or just generally develop an altruistic attitude, it all depends on this physical support, this body that you have now. Regarding special insight, Shantideva says in his chapter on concentration from the Bodhisattva Way, understanding that insight thoroughly joined with calm abiding totally destroys afflictions. First seek calm abiding, which is accomplished through delight in non-attachment to the world. Insight and the cultivation of it is what destroys afflictions, right? First you give rise to it and then you develop it further and then to destroy the afflictions. And likewise, it is also said that the branches are, let me ask again, I don't have this in front of me. Wanda Geshe, yenla dida tamshini ene kharsa gonda
Tu besharap ten
sikhamadi.
dusungro. Yala dida tamjini tu besharap ten dusungsro. Tubasan yichum den digiro.
Less. All these branches were taught by the sage as branches for wisdom. So the other 5 perfections are all causes and branches for accomplishing wisdom or special insight. What is the nature of special insight? Fundamentally, it is a wisdom, right? Out of the 51 types of mental factors, it is a wisdom. So generally speaking, wisdoms can be non-virtuous, they can be virtuous, they can be afflicted, wisdoms. The wisdom in this context of special insight is only virtuous, however, right? Its focal object is only a virtuous phenomenon. Throughout our day to day, we generate all sorts of consciousnesses, right? We even develop wisdoms day to day. They might be virtuous or non-virtuous, but either way, we don't recognize the good wisdoms we develop and we don't utilize them. We let them go. Likewise, we develop meditative stabilizations, right? Another type of mental factor day to day, but we don't recognize the good types and we don't utilize them. We let them go. What we do allow ourselves to focus on, however, are non-virtuous mental factors, right? Getting upset that other people have offended you or were mean to you, and focusing in this way, we understand that these are upsetting states of mind, but we tend to gravitate towards them and dwell on them. So we're going to meditate a bit now for the following purpose. So you guys are busy and you live pretty normal lives. Some of you might have been in the office today, although it's a weekend, been working. And even if you haven't been, you've been at home, all sorts of things have happened today. You have all sorts of thoughts going through your mind. You might be thinking about the market. Geshe loves to use this example. But essentially, we need to sort of get rid of those thoughts right now because they're obstacles for us to think clearly. And the classic Buddhist meditation to get rid of these discursive thoughts is breathing meditation, right? So whether you have all sorts of even virtuous, non-virtuous, afflictive thoughts going through your mind, we're sort of going to trick them by focusing on the breath and let them subside naturally. Uh, in a more tantric context, there's what's called the 9 rounds breathing meditation, where you sort of breathe in and then you breathe out fully in order to get all of your so-called old air out of your body. And on a subtle level, this is said to be beneficial if you sort of refresh the air in your body and get out the old. But whatever the case, on a very basic level, I just want you to count your breath. So in and out, 1, 2, 3, and so forth for a few minutes. Because it's considered very important to relax our minds. Um, you know, in your day-to-day life, you go to the office, you have a family. If you get sort of disturbed or upset throughout the day, it's useful to put yourself aside from the situation for a while and just focus on your breath. Can help uh, ground you again, refresh you, and calm you down. So I don't want you to think about anything that comes to mind. I want you to try and focus on the breath, and I want you to try and count it. So after such a meditation, you do get a nice, calm, relaxing feeling, don't you? Right? There's a feeling that comes with it.
Mm.
Actually, day to day in our life, um, certain states of mind, like being agitated or feeling a little bit down or not being able to sleep and so forth, can be said to be rooted in our physical condition, right? To the extent that our body is comprised of the four elements and mainly water, right? When everything's in balance, uh, then physically we feel well, and that can affect our mental state. When those elements are not in balance, for example, you have uh, fire or the air element um, stronger than the others, it can lead to certain states of mind arising. It can also lead to you not being able to sleep. And I recommend that if you have trouble sleeping, right, you can't get to sleep, your mind is sort of racing, wake up, right, sit up and just count the breath until you've calmed yourself down. There's a story of a meditative practitioner who went into a cave and was trying to achieve up to the ninth mental abiding called equipoise. And he was having a lot of trouble doing so. He was having all sorts of thoughts arising, more than usual. And he went back to his teacher, and his teacher asked him, "How was your meditation? Was it good?" And the student said, "No, generally it's quite okay, but today I have all sorts of thoughts arising in my mind. What's going on?" And the teacher praised him for being able to identify that he's having all sorts of thoughts occurring. And what this should tell us is that even if you do have thoughts popping up, the most important thing is that you're identifying that this is happening. Because too often we sort of let our mind get carried away with those thoughts and we go along with them. It's very important to be aware of what's occurring in our mind. In the greater treatises, they advise that we alternate between analytical and placement meditation. So to not completely do analytical meditation, for example, but analyze for a bit, pause, and then focus single pointedly on that analyzed object. And likewise, not spend forever single pointedly on an object, but rather pause to analyze it a bit. Nagarjuna stated that with respect to all phenomena, when you search for the designated object, you cannot find it. Conventionally, however, it exists, and therefore the conventions of going, eating, walking, staying are tenable. So now for our next meditation, how we're going to approach it is first, we're going to perform some analysis, at the end of which we give rise to the thought, oh, it's really not there. I really can't find it. It doesn't exist from its own side. And on that final thought, we're going to place our focus single pointedly and do placement meditation.
Mm.
So our first object of analysis is the I, right? This I, which is the basis of saying I go, I stay, and so on and so forth, right? This sense of I that is always present. When you analyze it and look for it, do you find it? Right? Let's use an example. So whose name can we use? And this is why Geshe was laughing, right? We normally say I, but let's give it a name. So let's go with Tashi, right? Let's pretend we're talking about someone called Tashi. They call themselves Tashi, but is Tashi the head? Is it their legs? Is Tashi their arms? No, Tashi is not any of those parts. And therefore, Tashi is not found. But at this point, don't fall into the extreme of annihilation and think that Tashi doesn't exist, nothing exists. what you should conclude is that this tashi is merely an imputation by thought, right? And as the translator is translating what I'm saying, I want you to think about this and analyze it, right? Reflect on this as they speak. Where am I? Look among your parts and really try to think, where am I? And conclude that this I is a mere imputation upon this basis of designation. The I is empty of existing inherently from its own side. we
That
meditate too
then,
long, you'll get tired. So, a question for you: how does your experience of focusing on the breath before and this experience of meditating in which you analyze and look among your parts and are engaged in, more mental activity compare? So when you look for the designated object I among your parts, do you find it? A classic analogy or example used in the Buddhist treatises for this analysis is that of a chariot. So a chariot is still something that exists today in some countries like India. But I think you all know what a chariot is, right? So when you look at the parts of a chariot, for example, the wheels, and you think, is that the chariot? No. You look at the axle, is that the chariot? No. Is the front part the chariot? No. However, when all of the parts come together as a collection, they form a basis for imputation of the chariot. And the same is, it's the same with respect to ourselves, with the I. The I is established through imputation onto the five aggregates. So that means it doesn't exist independently of the five aggregates. It's not existing from its own side, independent of being an imputation onto those. However, we mistakenly have a very strong sense of an independent I, which causes our unhappiness and the unhappiness of others.
mm,
So, a lot of our mental upsets, our anxieties, and our fears ultimately need to be dealt with through cultivating special insight and calm abiding, if you think about it, right? Because our disturbances of mind, right, come from, for example, pride, anger, attachment, and so forth. And you can't go to a hospital and get an injection to remove these afflictions, like the three poisons. You can go to a hospital or a psychiatrist and get an injection which can temporarily remove, like, how to say this, like intense states of mind that are happening for you presently, but it doesn't deal with the problem ultimately, right? Science doesn't have a long-term permanent solution to remove your anger and anxieties because they are rooted in our minds not being pacified, not being tamed, right? Because we haven't tamed our minds, we give rise to anger, pride, jealousy, attachment, and so forth. And these need to be eradicated through taming our mind. So if we look at the topic of special insight in Tsongkhapa's great treatise for the stages of the path, for example, it is over 200 pages long. So obviously we're not going to go into every detail. We'll just look at the main topics. So the main topics are the collections required for special insight, the way to meditate on it, and the measure of having achieved it. So starting with the collections or the necessary causes of special insight, Tsongkhapa starts that with saying that one needs to rely on an expert who unmistakably understands the crucial points of the scriptures, and you need to listen to those explanations of stainless treatises and generate a view of emptiness through the wisdoms of hearing and contemplation, right? So it's quite clear that if we want to develop special insight, we need to rely on a, a stainless explanation of it. And we need to engage in listening and contemplation from our side to settle, to come to a conclusion on the meanings. So without an authentic source to rely on, it's very difficult that one could accomplish special insight by themselves. So with respect to this collection required to accomplish special insight, In order to generate special insight, one needs to rely on commentaries by masters such as Nagarjuna, who elucidated the meaning of emptiness by clarifying which sutras were of interpretable meaning and which were of definitive meaning. And having identified such, explaining and settling the meaning of emptiness within those sutras of definitive meaning, settling what the actual object of negation is, also settling and coming to a conclusion of what selflessness of persons is and what selflessness of phenomena actually is. So doing so ourselves, understanding such counts as the collection required to achieve special insight. So fundamentally, we need to establish selflessness of phenomena through reasoning, right? Selflessness of phenomena is the same as emptiness. So Nagarjuna famously did this through the reasoning of refuting production by way of the four extremes. So according to Nagarjuna, all phenomena are not established inherently or from their own side. If they were, he says, then when you search for the designated object, you should be able to find it. But it's not found. And why isn't it found? Because the object does not exist from its own side. It doesn't truly exist. If something truly exists, he says, it should be produced in one of four ways, right? It should be produced either from itself, from something else, from both, or without a cause. And through refuting these four extremes, one can settle or come to the conclusion of selflessness of phenomena. In order to establish that all phenomena do not exist from their own side, we need to identify the object of negation, right? We say that all phenomena are empty of being established by way of their own character or are empty of existing from their own side, right? So having said that, we're already talking about the object of negation, because the object of negation of emptiness is not, for example, when you talk about the emptiness of a house, the house being empty of furniture, we're not talking about that. We're talking about things being empty of existing from their own side, and you can apply that to anything. For example, a vase. You can say a vase is empty of existing from its own side or existing by way of its own characteristics. And thus you've identified the object of negation. As Shantideva says in his Bodhisattva's Way of Life, without touching upon the essentially it means, but without touching upon the object of negation or the really existent thing, you cannot understand its emptiness, right? So if you can't identify what true existence or inherent existence means, you can't understand the emptiness of that, right? So everything, when you look for it, and when you look for it, you cannot find it. When you look for the designated object, you cannot find it. So therefore, what you're left with is a conventional existence in which things exist by mere name, by mere imputation, and that is an acceptable mode of existence, right? You can say that things exist conventionally. It's tenable. So towards the end of Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stages of the path, he identifies the object of negation, and he says, generally, there are two types of objects of negation, that of reasoning and that of the path. So essentially, he's saying there is that negated by reasoning and that negated by the path. So what is the object of negation of the path? Well, he cites Maitreya's separation of the middle from the extremes, which says afflictive obscurations and cognitive obscurations were taught, all obscurations are among these, and when they are gone, you are free. So the meaning of this is that the objective negation of a true path, for example, a special insight that directly realizes emptiness, are afflictive obscurations and cognitive obscurations. So that's the objective negation of the path, right? So if we sort of expand a little bit about what that means, we can use bodhicitta as an example. So bodhicitta is fundamentally a mind that pursues the aims of others. So the object of negation of bodhicitta would be pursuing one's own aims, right? In order to achieve the victorious state of omniscience of a Buddha, one needs to eliminate what are called cognitive obscurations, or obscurations to knowledge, as they're sometimes translated as. And one needs to eliminate them together with their seeds. So we could talk about this from many schools of thought. If we look at the middle way autonomous school of thought, in order to achieve the state of arhatship, of a hearer or solitary realizer, one needs to abandon grasping at true existence. So Geshe started reading again from another page in Tsongkhapa's Great Treatise of on the Stages of the Path. I don't have that in front of me in the English right now. But essentially, on the section of the way to meditate on special insight. So Tsongkhapa says, without finding the view of the definitive meaning of selflessness, and so on and so forth. So here, the definitive meaning of selflessness essentially means emptiness, right? That's what the definitive meaning here is in this context. You will encounter other explanations of what the definitive meaning is in other contexts, but here it's emptiness. So essentially, without realizing emptiness, one cannot generate special insight. Now, this is important because it's not enough to have a mere understanding through conviction in the meaning, right? So mere conviction of the meaning of emptiness is not sufficient. You need to realize emptiness. And not only is it sufficient to just give rise to special insight, once one needs to continue to cultivate the continuum of special insight by relying on mindfulness and reflection, and to keep the momentum going. Tsongkhapa continues by saying, having generated special insight, one then meditates, one uses placement meditation on the meaning of selflessness without analyzing it. Tsongkhapa reiterates that one requires both types of meditation, special insight and calm abiding. It's not sufficient to have only one. You will not achieve omniscience through simply cultivating calm abiding by itself, likewise through simply cultivating special insight by itself. Furthermore, you need to conjoin the two. The final topic presented by Tsongkhapa is, of course, the measure of having achieved special insight. So I don't have the page of the English right now, nor am I looking at the Tibetan, unfortunately. Don't have time to search for it. However, what Tsongkhapa says is that one achieves special insight, fully qualified special insight, when one can give rise to the bliss of pliancy that arises through analysis. So before one generates calm abiding, focused on emptiness, and at that time there is the pliancy, the bliss of pliancy, physical and both mental, that occur. But the bliss of pliancy that occurs during special insight, or is induced by special insight, is one must say, a higher or a better type of pliancy, because it can arise even through even when one is analyzing the object.
Could Geshe elaborate more on the bliss of blind?
Okay. I think I'm actually picking up your voice through Geshe's microphone or something. It's very, very faint. But basically, can Geshe explain more about the bliss of pliancy? That's what I heard. So, I mean, of course, the topic of the bliss of pliancy is a very difficult one to talk about if you haven't achieved it. But maybe the best way to sort of give an idea of what it is to distinguish the ninth mental abiding of equipoise from actual calm abiding. So during the ninth mental abiding of equipoise, you haven't achieved calm abiding, have you? Right? It's the step before it. But you're still able to place your essentially body and mind on an object without effort for a very long time because you've eliminated lethargy and excitement at that point. So your body, you've got some sort of physical pliancy, right? Not saying the bliss of physical pliancy, but you've got a physical pliancy, which allows your body to become very, very light and serviceable, let's say, right? So you can stay in meditation for a long time. And likewise, you have a mental pliancy, which means you can allow your mind to remain on an object for many, many hours. But we can say the difference between the ninth mental abiding called equipoise and actual calm abiding is that calm abiding induces a special bliss of pliancy, right? You have a special physical and mental bliss that arises from it. So Tsongkhapa talks a lot about calm abiding over about 60 pages in his great treatise. But essentially, what it comes down to and what pliancy is actually posited as, and I think he quotes Asanga's compendium on this, is that it is the cutting of the continuum of the assumption of what they're called, let's say, negative tendencies of body and mind. There's a very technical term. They're called the negative tendencies, sometimes translated as the assumption of bad states. But anyway, through eliminating these negative tendencies, and sometimes they're posited as 5, for example, the negative tendencies of sleep and so forth, what one does is one makes one's body and mind serviceable. And when they become serviceable, they are able to eliminate obscurations. So I'm just looking at one quote from the Lamrim Chemo on this point that, quoting Asanga, the negative tendencies of body and mind are what prevent us from placing our body and mind on a virtuous activity for as much as we want. So according to the commentarial treatises, calm abiding is not necessarily qualified by a bliss of pliancy of the body. And there are specific instances where that will not be present. But generally, we say it is. There are a few exceptions where it's not. Lots. When you first accomplish calm abiding, it's said that you do so on the basis of desire realm support. So it would make sense that in that context, it would always be qualified by a pliancy of body or a bliss of pliancy of the body.